Okay. First here. That makes sense. Okay. Okay. Well, there was an a request that I go live. So what the heck is this? Oh. Oh, I see. Just to monitor the breakout. We'll see. I'm not gonna go crazy hype train on you, so if that's what you want, you're probably gonna want a different stream. What I want to do is make sure that we hold the phone, you know, like keep the breakout. So the one thing that's kind of bothersome right now is this volume's dropping pretty significantly. I'm not super concerned if it comes back down, but I'd like to see it stay above 830. 840 is even better because we haven't been able to really get above 840 and stay above 840. But it's pretty important that we made the move the way that we did here. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Because we're going to want to look at the bigger version of this tiny little thing that happened here, which I talked about in the video this morning, and I called it the foretop. And what was required of a breakout happened today. We pushed up, we found support right around 796, and then moved back to the upside. So that was kind of all that I was looking for, and then needed to push above 830. So there's like 3 big check boxes that we've gotten. I was purposely very bearish because I didn't feel like anyone was really giving any thought to possible bear scenario here. And it's still possible. I know you don't want to hear that, but it is still possible that this is an upthrust that doesn't have a continuation. So what needs to happen is that we need to see that major creek hold. It could come very, very low, but I'd prefer to see it above 830. A lot of it's going to have to do with, we'll watch RSI and stuff like that. We'll see how it gets overbought and how it recovers. So what you don't want is you don't want to have a recovery that just gives up all that was traded, because then it really is like an upthrust. You want it to kind of find footing higher and find support and then continue. So right now, there's not really a whole lot to say until we see this thing kind of like turn down, and we'll see how it adjusts. All right, so let me reference what I'm talking about. I didn't have a lot of views on that video, and I understand why. It was kind of like a downer video. But it was made to look at the possibility of downside. And I talked about it yesterday. And we went through yesterday, and I'll leave the chart up so you can see it, because it's important to note a couple quick things, and we'll talk about in a minute why it's important. And I promise you, like, within the hour, you're going to have whatever it is I know, I'll tell you. But so what's going on here is you have this really classic, what I call like a foretop. And all that was needed at this point to break down was that it hooked beneath that 793 mark. And it was specifically about an intersection of a lot of different things. But the main thing was I wanted to see it push up, ideally make a new high first and then come back. It didn't do that this morning, so that left me kind of wondering if we were going to see it go, you know, or if it was just going to do another sideways action, because that push up didn't actually break a new high. It sat at like 809, I think. It chopped up into this corner here, and then it dropped. So I was waiting to see if we were going to make a new high, and when we did, I was kind of surprised at how quickly it moved I'm not surprised about how fast it moved, but I'm surprised it didn't even really mess with these guys at all, because these should have been like about the 50% markers for this move, and I guess they are about 50-50 up from where we started. But now what we need to do is SOS around 839. So that's the previous top. It's right underneath where I've got this blue drawn. Blue is drawn right up to 840. So you need to SOS right here, right where we are. Okay, and that's pretty much the only scenario. It had to push resistance. It did that. So that's a checkbox. So it came up, came back down, pushed all the way back up, pushed resistance, and then it really ideally finds support above 830. It can go below it. It just has to come back above it at some point. Does that make sense? So you can have it come down. It's okay. Wouldn't be the end of the world. Technically, it could even come as low as like way down here to 806. It would just need to very definitively come back up. Does that make sense? Like, you'd need to see something like this if you want to move, okay? And if it came down that low. You know, best case scenario, we don't even have to worry about it. We could just come down. Maybe we won't even need to do this, but maybe we just need to come down, hit 824 or something, come back above 830, and then we can push again. Again, I don't particularly care what happens, like whether we come really far down into this creek area or if we just stay pretty high. Doesn't really make a huge difference to me at this point. So we're going to watch this one. So I'm going to put this one up and I'll make it white because this one will be the first kind of line of defense. It looks like that's where the preliminary support was. So what that is like if you were to create like a bowl shape here, you would say like this is the last tangent on that bowl. And this, so it's like the last two highs basically. So instead of using like the steeper one, you use like the flatter one and you see if it holds there first, and then you go to the next one down, which would be here to here. And then you can go to the next one down, which is all the way to the top. Does that make sense? See how each of these like stacks up? So in doing so, we would find out where it's finding support pretty easily. So I'm on the 6-minute time frame, so we can see a little bit of nitty gritty here. Yeah, you know, and this guy intersects right around the top here anyways at 830, so it worked out. And then it looks like it broke above this one, came back down, hasn't really made any major move yet. The secondary push here came up on weaker volume, which indicates that you're probably going to get a bit of a pullback. So I wouldn't be surprised to see this chop a little bit more sideways before going up again. I wouldn't really want to see it extend higher than 850 right this second unless it's going to run. Does that make sense? Like, unless it's going to rip all the way up to the top right now, I don't really want to come above because it'd be nice to have it sort of consolidate first, because then we won't have to worry about later, like coming way back, right? You guys are like, who cares? Just let it run. Well, don't get me wrong. I think that's a good thing. But the previous high here over here was 849. So what we're doing right now is we're testing another previous supply, okay? And I don't think it's wise to try to make a higher high if you don't have the volume. So at this particular moment, my biggest concern is that small volume drop off on that second push. And it is pretty small. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, this is still a lot of volume compared to what we have had, so maybe it won't matter. But you can see it pressed above it. So right now would be a good time to chop, get some more support, and then create a little SOS around 850. And maybe it happens right this second. And if so, great. So we're going to look at price targets. So that's like locally what I'm looking for this to hold. Breakdown, there is no real way to know if this is a UT or a UTAD unless it distributes, has a distributive top. So for example, if this went up here and then slid all the way back down and then did this business, it might be distribution time, right? Because you could see how that sort of a motion, if it's on exhausting volume, could end up needing a bigger pullback. This is maybe where we'd end up seeing like an actual retest. But in terms of like an actual breakdown again, like a reversal where this is a flush and you get a double flush, which sends you down, it would need to sort of do this and then essentially like lose every level going down like this. And it'd have to eventually come all the way back beneath this particular yellow support. And I'll get to that in just a second. This one's really important. And it's kind of like the main deal for downside. And if you don't lose that, you're potentially still going to be able to come back up. So it's a pretty low bar. I mean, it's way down here. It's basically $8. You'd have to drop all the way back beneath 8 in order to really show some serious weakness. So, all right. So that being said, what are we looking for next? So we know what's going on locally. We want to get a little mini SOS above 850. Ultimately, the goal here is going to be seeing the same thing happen that just happened, but it's going to need to happen way up here around 910. So the next major step for this is going to be that 910 level, and that'll be a pretty big move once it finishes here with whatever it's going to do, whether it pulls back or not. Not particularly worried. I'd be a little more concerned that if it pushes up all the way, we might get an SOS and what's called a backup. So that's neither here nor there yet either. I guess if you push resistance here, you could have like a really strong looking SOS that then distributes and does like a full backup. That might be how you could accomplish something like the $8 max pain level, for example. If you really wanted to bring it back down for some reason, you had the breakout and then you could just, turn back around again. It doesn't seem as likely to me, but whatever. There's a lot of space up here. There's a lot of liquidity that hasn't been explored. So anything that happens up around and under 910 could be quite a bit. Like there could be quite a bit of trading that occurs from here down to 840 again. So assuming that everything goes well and we get up here and push the resistance, don't be surprised to see like a pretty major backup, because we really haven't traded this region very much at all. And we certainly haven't proven that each of these supply levels is demand. Does that make sense? And there's a lot of them. So every time this thing sold off on the top here, you're basically creating like little supply zones. And normally what you see is after the SOS, if there is a backup, if is a big question, but if there is a backup, you're probably going to see it come back down and check each of those. So again, don't be super surprised if this thing managed to come all the way back down before going again. The way this stock's been moving, it's just kind of all over the place. So, all right, so during the morning, I kind of noticed that there was a pretty clear iterative move that was going on. I kind of layered it here. It's easier to see it on like the 1 hour. So we'll go to like the 1 hour. And we were waiting to see if it found support around 50%, and that's exactly what happened here. So you look at the 1 hour, and that last pullback was super crucial. If this had broken down around that 795 area, and I said it yesterday, I thought it was going to be right around 793, and I think that's right where it went. 794, not bad though, a penny off, it's pretty good. That it would be there, it would have to find support, and it did. So the good news is it found it, and while it did that, it hit that 50%, and now it's pushing back to the upside. And that's on the 1 hour. On the 2 hour time frame, I feel like it wasn't quite 50. It was a little below it, actually. So even better, I suppose. No, I take it back. It was right there. Yeah, it found it. All right. So we want to see real volume, though. And I think this is where things kind of rubber meets the road kind of stuff. Is if this were to shoot up and then slide all the way back down, you might end up seeing this iterate outward. And I'm going to talk about that now. And this is going to be a little bit frustrating for people that are just like super hype, right? And I see y'all in the chat, the ones that are super hype. I get it. I get why. Hang on a second. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm looking at the chat here. There's not a whole lot of... Are you guys still there? Because, like, I feel like it's dead. For some reason, the stream, like, died or something. Okay, good. Thank you. It made me really nervous. Because I was just, like, talking, and then I was like, wait a minute. My thing, like, froze up. Nothing was moving, but it started again. All right, so on the 1 hour, it looks like we jumped over the, what is that, the 90? That's pretty good. That's a good sign. I usually like the 90 and 180. A lot of people use 200. I like to use the 90 and 180. Those pretty good stepping stones. So this would give us a really good spot. Again, if we can hold it. I don't really care what happens right now. If the chop is good, it might cool off RSI a bit. Push up again. We might see, again, that SOS and then pull back. And when we do that, perhaps we see this 90 is curled up and we get to find support on that EMA. The break above it is very significant, though. Usually, relative to its own time frame, that's usually about the same as our breakout. So we jump over the 90 right around the same time that we get a breakout. So sometimes it's like the 200, but I actually think the 90 is more often the case. And it just depends on the time frame you're on. But anyways, I digress. So this morning I was looking at this and I was like, oh, it's just a giant like shrinking, which makes sense. And I already knew that because I talked about it in the video, and we probably would have guessed that anyways. We talk about like fractal sequencing, right? And I noticed that the main point of this is like this kind of cat ear motion, right? And that we were worried that if we break down here, it's going to hook. And this is kind of where this all came from yesterday. But notice what happened after this low today. So we did the same thing twice. We pushed up into the corner, pressed against the top. But what happened during the low today is that here you actually have it break down beneath this uptrend. And then you got to zoom in to see it better. It does the same thing right here as well. So here's the uptrend, but notice how it's steeper. So interestingly, especially this morning, you could see it really clearly. It actually was hugging like a much steeper trend, which is kind of a bullish sign. And I was like, well, that's good. When it came down, it like hooked around this trend instead of picking out a lower one, for example. And then it never came down beneath this again, which is a big deal to me because it didn't make a lower, how do I say this? Like, it didn't make a lower push down into supply. Does that make sense? So it fell short of my target by about, I want to say it was like 770, and it actually only came down to like 775, which again, you might be like, hey, that's not even a huge deal, Booksy, who cares? Well, it's kind of a hint that things might not be the way that they are looking, you know? And I still think that, yeah, if this had come up and rejected, it's a pretty straightforward equation here, because when we talk about stuff like iterations, it's annoying to sound it out like that, but it's really important to understand that if this had broken down here and had rejected around that 793 instead of going above and then finding support, which is kind of like the danger that we were playing. This is like what the video was about and all that jazz yesterday. If we had done that, then when you look at the bigger iteration, what would your assumption be? Well, if this hooked right here on this trend and then dropped, you would assume that the next one down would do the same thing. So here's that next trend. So this one's really steep. This is pretty normal though, right? So you would see this probably make a new low, or maybe even not, but you would assume like, okay, probably going to hook here and then drop again. And it sort of creates this tidal wave, you know, you can call it like a snowball effect, right? A chain reaction, dominoes, whatever you want to say, where one leads into the next. So you, unfortunately, like I would have had to do measurements, and this is what I was doing on the stream yesterday because I was really worried it was going to break down. We'd have to do measurements of this breakdown and see how like far it goes. And then we'd have to like kind of proportionally scale it out and see what target it picked and all that jazz. Well, it didn't do that. So the good news is that at the end here, it came up again, and I was like, oh, it looks like it's going to iterate again. And notice like the pattern here, like what's the point of all this, right? It's almost like a triple top that's going on. Like what's the point of all this? Well, every time they did this cat ear function and dropped it to a new low, it grabs liquidity, right? And then it pushes all the way back up to the high on the highest part of the creek, like presses back against the creek. So it's just kind of like ramming up against it, you know, repeatedly. And notice that the patterning here, like, is almost exactly the same too on the RSI. Like the way it came across, everything's the same until here. And then this changes drastically because no longer are you making lower lows, but you've pushed out. And this is where if it were going to do, let's pretend that it was going to go sideways. And this is coming, there's a point to all this if you're like frustrated. Like, why don't you just get to the point? If this was going to go sideways, it would have had to have hit like 810 and then come back down again. And then it would have done the same nonsense here. But what's weird is like, it was hard for me to even see like where would it go. There was no room. You can't really drop again. So it would have to be like this really wimpy drop. Maybe we could have like skidded into $8, you know, end of the week or by Friday. And I think that's what a lot of people were thinking with Max Payne. So the iteration here doesn't really pan out on the last one because it didn't happen. Like, and we talked about it yesterday a little bit. I tried to do a little demo thing for my Discord group, and I got like 0 replies on it. But I basically said that, we'll talk about this one too. Where is it? This was another way to visualize price targets. So one goes up to the gap and one goes to the presumed spring, like low spring target, and it's following them. So we should have a path or pathway. So if we're going to come back down, it's probably going to follow towards that lower target. And these are all like parallel lines that go down towards those targets. So bears were definitely trying. Everything was accelerating, shrinking, if you will. And then this might be where you see like that pullback. We'll watch these lines. This is not the one I wanted to show you. It's just a separate chart. Yeah, so I was talking about this, and I said that if you get a breakdown, this is what you'd see here, where each time you get that first M, it pushes up high, and then it creates a new low, and then the second M kind of consolidates and then drops. And that's the distributive pattern that AMC likes to play out, where we see that, what I call it cat ears, because it's super recognizable. Okay. You copy Ants Trade. What? From Reddit? All right, dude, you're out of here. I don't even know who you are, but kind of done with you. All right. Yeah, he's just being nasty. So this kind of stuff right here. Yeah, I'm not even gonna, whatever. I don't know who that is. Don't care. It's just one person. So this is what you would need to see in a breakout. Okay. So when we came back up, all right, the first time we did this, this is what happened. Okay. The first time we did this move right here, which is the biggest one, and it goes from September 11th all the way through September 28th, we broke down. So we layered down. Then we layered underneath it. We never came back above it again. It might seem like we did, but we really didn't. Like this move right here, it ultimately, once it broke this final like push, it really kind of stays nestled underneath it. So that was problematic because it's starting to look like it's going to turn down. Okay. But then look at what happened today on the push-up. We got the M cross, the first one, and then the second one came above. So in one case, you're moving from fans. So like this, I'm sorry, I said the second one. I got a little distracted there. Let me repeat that. So the first iteration is the biggest one. That one broke down. Second iteration is the same, almost exactly the same, and it broke down, but it didn't come quite as low. It still made a new low, but it didn't push supply any at all. And it definitely didn't push out of the triangle as much, the pennant shape as much, which is a good sign. The third one, which is this tiny little guy right here, it kind of just ignores the status quo and it breaks back up and it does this. So it crossed to the upside. So if you were doing fib fans, and I don't use them maybe as much as the next guy, but I do like them. They're pretty useful. For example, if you're using a fib speed resistance, this is what I'm talking about. Like you would have in a bearish breakdown, mess this up. In a bearish breakdown, you would have why is it doing this? Should be a right angle, whatever. I guess it is. Anyways, in a bearish breakdown, you'd have it go down below these. Does that make sense? And in a bullish one, you would flip it around and you go the other way. So you'd cross the creeks the opposite direction. So we were having a heck of a lot of trouble crossing the creek to the upper direction. We could not do it. And none of these first two schematics here, these first two ones didn't do it, but they both successfully made higher lows, which is a good thing. And that's why I got like super excited. Then I was like, wait a minute, this technically could still go down. I'm Mr. Flip Flop this week. If you followed all the videos, because the setup here kept layering down. That's why I was nervous, kept doing this. We hadn't done any of this, and I really wanted to see that breakout here on this iteration going into Monday and Tuesday, and it didn't happen. But this particular one right now seems to be this model. So until it does otherwise, I think we're in a good spot. So what I'm going to do is, again, look at this big picture. We'll talk about what this could mean. Okay. So we can see it went from the low here. It chopped in the middle. I hope I'm right about how many there are, but I think I am. Yeah, that's about 50%. So it did like about a 50-50 move from, where's the bottom? Let's make sure we're doing it right. Might as well. We got time. Take like an extra 30 seconds to make sure it's right. Or close enough, right? Yeah, so a little bit over a 50% extension from where it hit the peak and then pulled back. So it hits the peak and pulls back down and then rockets up about 50%. This ended up coming all the way up to, started raining. This ended up coming all the way up to 850. It didn't go above 850. Well, that's okay. It went higher. As long as it pushed resistance in that instance. That's what I was saying earlier. No, it's okay. I was like, oh no, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. It needs to rest for a little bit. I said I'd prefer it to stay above 830. So nothing to worry about there. Not yet. So if that's a 50-50 push, you can do the same thing on the next one up. This is what I'm trying to say. This doesn't work perfectly, but it's pretty darn close most of the time. So let's do the next one. I'm gonna favor, I don't think it's gonna be the tippy top right there. It could be. So what's a 50-50 extension from this particular bottom, roughly? Let's just say 950 or 960. So you see how like one thing could beget the next thing? And in our case, because it broke up instead of down on this final little micro here, we might be in a really good spot because this is a small S-curve, then there's a larger one at play. It's a bit odd because I don't really know if that's fair. I feel like normally when I do S curves, I kind of go to like the middle point. It'd be more like 883. But yeah, well, then again, that would get you over this one. All right, well, I got to make up my mind. I can't do it one way or the other. I'm not going to go to the top. I'm going to go to the same spot. I'm going to go to this spot right here where that breakout happens instead. Because that to me still looks like it could be like the 50% of that range. So right around 890, 895. So that actually adds up. I think it makes sense. Because this would get you above here. This would get you above the next level up, the next supply zone. Why does that have to be 50%? It doesn't have to be 50%. I'm just observing where the big pullback started, and it seems like it was almost perfectly like a 50-50 S-curve right here. So that makes it easy for me to kind of make an estimation. And honestly, it usually is 50%. So that's one. The second 50% is up here. And then the third one, this might be kind of disappointing if I do it this way. Y'all are like, this is only going to go like that far. Well, remember, like, this could be just for a breakout. You know what I mean? Like, it's just going up each level. So this one actually goes to like 930. So each one of these does something pretty important, which is each one of them steps up above a previous resistance. So the good news is it doesn't matter how you slice it, because I just did the lowest possible estimation. And it was basically like 930 was that high. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stop there. I'm just saying in terms of like the moves themselves, each one of those gives you a pretty succinct SOS type deal. So let's see. Yeah, trying to get these layers drawn out. I'd say that's pretty solid, actually. That looks really good. Could be more perfect, sure. So here's what I just did, and I'll tell you again why, but it's just because if the breakout is successful, and we think it is thus far, this would be the first iterative outward move. And this is nothing about this is particularly that interesting. It's just like if it continues, then these are where I'd expect there to be some stopping points. So the first one's right here. And then the second one. So why would I do this? I might do it because it helped me to see where possible entries and exits might be. Now, someone else in another stream might be drawing like a fib right now, like from top to bottom here, and I'm sure these levels are pretty comparable. I'm pretty positive they would be. So if we wanted to just test it, because I guess this is a weird thing to think about, but if you've been following enough of my nonsense, you probably are aware of my thoughts on this. Usually there's some semblance of order here. So this is backwards. Might be better to do a fib retracement from up here down, actually, instead of this one, just this whole range. Because this kind of depends on where do you think it's going to go up or down. And they don't really add up very well there. Well, we'll see. I'm curious to know if they work out. All right, so here's the second one. So this is the second S-curve. Again, assuming the iterations are what they seem to be, and I think they are. It's basically like that. And then the third one would be the biggest one. And none of these look particularly powerful, but I don't think that's the point. So if you're wondering like why isn't it just looking like it's going to rocket to the moon, I don't really think that's the point. I think the point of it is to kind of stair step your way up into the end here. All right, so I'm going to get rid of these other lines. It's kind of confusing. And we'll look at and see if there's a cross trend here. I'm guessing there is, but we got to make sure. Actually, it looks really low. I would have guessed that one more so than the other. I wonder if I should use this guy instead. Well, then I'd have to measure it again. Actually, that one looks pretty good. Yeah, there's a lot of hits right here on this first area. This is quite a bit. So this seems like it would move pretty fast. So the second one is steeper still. And I don't even know how to do this without... So maybe we'll just do that. I don't really know how to do this without zooming in, so I'm going to have to zoom in. I don't have any problem with this. I just want it to hold, and then it can move on to the next one. It should have a pullback. You don't want it to just go like straight up. So actually, I'm going to use the curvature on the first, the way this kind of navigated. I'm going to use the same kind of general navigation here. You see those two tops kind of wrestled along this. They whipped around it. It's pretty clean, actually. It looks like a nice rotation around it each time. And this guy could be the same way. So that looks pretty good. So let's see if there's a cross there as well. Hard, it's going to be maybe a little bit harder to do, but it looks like the second M. This one looks a little different. So this one actually would make it feel like it could go a lot longer. No, wait a minute. Oh, I did it from that first, not the drop. Okay, well, here? Is that right? Yeah, that one's pretty low, so that looks like completely different. Maybe it's going to take a lot longer because I'm just making an assumption that that's like halfway, but it might not be. It might be horizontally, it might take a lot longer, you know? Yeah, it could be. Or this target's just higher. So instead it's over here somewhere, significantly higher. So let's do this. The only reason I would even do this is because I'm going to have to I would make the assumption that this is probable. Does that make sense? Like that it's very probable that there's a trend that cuts through it on an S-curve, because it just does. If we were looking at it like retrospectively, that's what we would see. So it should be there if it's going to happen. Oh, well, I kind of like this one. I don't really want to change it. It looks like a nice one. But the marker seems a bit weak to me. I wonder. It just doesn't seem like it moved enough. Things will get weird here because the thing about S-curves that I don't like, that I'm pretty bad about, and I would just admit that, would be that finding that middle can be really challenging. This almost suggests that we already got there, but I don't think that's true. I feel like it's right there. Maybe it's a lower target then. The target's actually like over here. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to be able to get it perfect every time. I think this first one looks pretty good, but it's so tight that who knows. The next ones will be different. Seems about right to me. You see how this one crosses over though? So I would almost expect the next one to be slower. I guess I could do it on that other chart. Snooze fest, I know. This is not exciting. I'm not sure this is going to be any better. So in this case, I made the middle 795. So I suppose I could do something like that where I assume that the middle is correct. So let me try that with this one. That kind of makes me bummed out though. Maybe that the first move is already done. Man, it's really hard to tell. Nah, still getting that 865. I still like that one because it makes sense of the... It doesn't make a lot of sense otherwise. To go like nowhere land. And I know it's like none of this has happened, but a lot of times this is the structural way it'll set up. So I think that's still that one. That's number 2. I still think it's that same level. That's what it'd be targeting anyways, assuming you could get over it. And then this one actually sets you up a little lower. So if I use the lower one, which is what I did here, instead of like 780, or excuse me, instead of $8, or rather the breakout's the one I used first. That's the one at 809. That gives you a much higher high. It hits 930. If I just use the center of the wedge, moves up here. And we're going to have to do a Bolkowski target in a minute, but I'm not there yet. I mean, obviously that'd be about 50%. So it'd just take you right back to the top. So that doesn't change anything. Oh, well, that kind of isn't a no-brainer, right? It's like, well, you'd just be essentially creating like a channel. So just go back up. Either way. I guess instead of trying to estimate it, we could just say this is what needs to happen. Like, here's what needs to happen in order for this to continue to break out. You know what I mean? In order for this to continue. You need to get back above 850. We didn't get there yet. We did break 840, which is good, and we came back down. We're checking right now along that 830. We're going to see what happens. I'll zoom in and check it out a little more detail. Not out of the woods yet. Really need to see it have that support built and then continue. Not super concerned about support building where it is. I don't know, man. It would have been nice to get this down, but c'est la vie. I don't know. And sometimes on these ranges, you start with one thing in mind and then you look back and you're like, oh, well, it could be something else. And so this is another possibility. Now that I'm like adjusting it. And this would put us out a little bit farther, probably. Might be better too. It almost doesn't matter. You can see the waveform completing here. So that's what matters the most. Why do I think this is going to happen? Again, because anytime a small iteration finishes, as long as there's the truth behind it is true, right? So as long as the buyers are really stepping in and they really want to run it, and it's not just a trap, you'll see that continuation happen as you go upward, like get to larger and larger iterations of the same move. So the most micro of this is actually right here. It's super small. Could I be wrong? Could there be another even smaller one? Maybe, but I don't think so because it already jumped out. So unless the smaller one is setting up way up here as part of the breakout, it almost in that case doesn't matter, right? Because then you could just read it either way. I still think this is the most likely candidate at the moment. Right here, this tiny little guy, and it finally found support on 50 and push. So pretty much every time frame too, up to 2 hours, which is neat. Yeah, I think this is about right. I'm happy to be a little bit wrong about it, but I think that it's going to be something like this. And we'll see. It would be pretty amazing, wouldn't it, if like those little cups formed like right there? I think people would be like, "Ooh, that's neat." I would be like, "Ooh, that's neat." But that would be kind of a neat little. I think it would be. I say the word neat like 10 times. I do think it would be really cool because we don't normally get to see. It just doesn't happen that often that we get a really clean version of this. So it'd be cool. Yeah, I don't know about this one. It's hard to say. These other two look right to me, but the middle one right here looks weird. So I'm not sure. I guess we'll find out. This might actually be good because this could point us to the future as well. Sure, makes sense. All right. Anyways, what needs to happen? So let's go back to the micro because it's 248 and everyone's going to want to know if this thing's going to just fly to the moon or drop like a brick tomorrow or whatever. Above the supply, we've already come above the main creek here. We broke out. So unless this is a head fake, we should be in good shape. We do not want to slide back down beneath the creek before close. So we need to close above the creek breakout. That's always a big deal, especially for anybody interested in Wyckoff. If you ever see it push out above a creek and then come back down and close beneath it, or make a new high and then come back down and close in the range, not always the best thing for us. So it would be best for us to close above 839. Okay? If we close above 839, it will be okay. Like I will feel a lot better. Maybe it won't be the best thing ever. Maybe it'll be a trap, but in terms of like definite distribution type setups, close beneath 839 is not ideal for us. We want it to get above. So for the moment, that's what my thought is that would be the best thing we could see. If it were to come back and it didn't close, let's say it stays below, it's generated a hook here, it kind of looks like, and it fails to break out again. Where could we maybe see it come back to where it might be a little bit safe? Again, I think above 830 is probably where we want it. I know it can come down lower, but I don't want to see it do that right into a close. I would much rather see it happen during regular trading hours if it's going to dip low. I'd rather see strength here and it really hold, because it didn't just push resistance, which is fine, but remember it like came above 1, 2, 3 previous highs. So as many of those as we can hold, the better. Makes sense? As many of those we can hold, the better. And 830 is like the top one. We can do some more basic stuff here. Let's look at, this is a little off. So let's look at the trend. Basic is good. Yeah, quite a bit of space on this trend. Let's go to like the 6 minute. So I just get a little bit more information. I don't want to go any lower than that right now. if I can avoid it. That's good. So the 6 minute had a retest on its 90 and then pushed up. So that's a good sign. Again, like iteratively, if you go up to the next time frame, so like we're at 6 minute, then I'll go up to 15, and let's see where that 90 EMA is. Just kind of curious. Actually, that was really low. The 90 was also tested right there on the 15 minutes. So that's way down there. So that definitely could be a bigger pullback. Let's check 30 minute. Same deal, man. Everything got super compressed. It's almost a given that you'd have some kind of a major pullback here. It does look like it's rejecting a little bit on the 90 on the 1 hour. So we're going to have to recapture that if we don't hold it into close, as it looks like it's right underneath it. Pushed above it and then came right back down underneath it. Not a big deal. Still pushed above it. Push resistance. As long as it holds support, doesn't really matter that much if it comes back down beneath it. Just needs to hold support. I'm not seeing a whole lot of volume on this sell-off. It looks good. It's like gone down to basically nothing. I don't see us moving for real without a spring. There are lots of bottoms that look like this on AMC, and it's not always like obvious at first, but we've seen a lot of bottoms that have played out this way without like a secondary spring motion. So this has been a pretty normal bottom setup for AMC. The biggest problem here was like the last two didn't look healthy to me, but then today it flipped again. It's been flip-flopping. Could it be that this is like a UT? That's probably what you're suggesting. Yeah, and if it is, it'll drop. But it didn't come above the top of the range, so it's way down here, right? So is it enough of a UT? Not really. It's pretty mild so far. It only really jumped over like a small portion. It jumped over these ones. So on that last iteration. So it's not out of the question that it comes down. Like we've seen this kind of stuff happen on AMC where it'll pop and you'll get what's called an upthrust and it's a fake out. But if it happens, it's got to be like today and tomorrow. Does that make sense? Like you need to see this thing close on the weekly candle, for example, like back beneath this trend. So it's not going to do that. It's not going to come down for a spring. And if it's finding support, it's kind of simple. It's like a dumb way of saying it's not going to go down if it's holding, you know. So profound. What I mean is that it's already jumped the creek. So if it were going to go to the downside and they really needed that liquidity, it should have been right here today. That's my opinion. Or it should be, if they're going to do a UT, this should be selling off like crazy right now. Like it should be sliding all the way back down through the creek, because a UT is not going to like it's not going to hold above. Does that make sense? The whole point of an upthrust, if that's what you were looking for, to get you down to the spring level, would be to get a sell-off ensued. So if they pump up here and volume is basically like not there, the sellers aren't stepping in to drive the price back down. You would have a really high volume top with a really strong slide all the way back through the creek. If that happened, I would be like, yep, we're going down for a spring, because then that's your typical reversal. So unless it happens tomorrow and the next day, I'm not inclined to think that's likely at the moment, because it finally pushed up. Y'all, they've been dangling a carrot in front of our faces for like 2 weeks, because every time we've pushed up, we've checked demand. Every time we push down, we check supply, and the supply has been temptingly like driving the price down quite a bit. But it has not been remaining down, and we've spent most of the time in the upper portion of the range here. So every time the price has been driven low, specifically beneath 760, and it didn't get there this time, but every time it's been driven low, it just hasn't spent very much time there at all. When it gets driven high, it's been spending a whole lot of time in the upper half of this range. Very little time in the lower portion. And that tells me that anytime the price is being driven down, buyers are really quickly buying it back up, and there's not enough sellers to keep the continuation going downward. Right? Now there are some, especially these first two upthrust right here and this guy here, this move particularly on September 13th, and then the two moves that happened on the 29th and the 2nd, those are both fairly distributive. There was high volume tops in each of these moves. They were just pumps to sell off and drive the price back down. But not surprisingly, they appear at the same spot in what I'm saying is a very strong iteration. It seems pretty clear to me. They're both in the same exact spot right before you drive down and try to make a new low. So the sell-offs are happening where they're supposed to be happening. You see this? So right now, what we just did is we pushed back up and we pushed above that resistance. That's what I'm trying to say. Like it's already pushed high. So in order for sellers to get down, they need to now dump on this stock and drive it all the way back through the creek. Otherwise, I don't see how that's going to happen. The next step should be finding support and then another push all the way up to 910 area. Makes sense? UTAD looking for 650 or 7. That's what I'm trying to say. A UTAD would be, in this case, yeah, it would have to be like right now. So in order for there to be a UTAD, which is an upthrust after a distribution, I mean, it doesn't even really make a lot of sense because we're talking about it like locally here, and we haven't even seen a new low. So it's a really strange thing to say like it has to be a UTAD or something. This is kind of a UTAD, this double top, for example, and this double top, these two, right before they drive the price low, because they distribute and then they buy in again and then you redistribute. But it's really more of just like a walk down, whereas an upthrust after a distribution would imply that you've had a sign of weakness. And I'm not seeing a sign of weakness because when this came down, it made a higher low and then it creates a support and then it comes down below that support, which would be more like a little mini spring. We were talking about it like an LPS because we weren't sure if it was eventually going to make a larger spring at the bottom here. Is it possible that this is weaker than, you know, we're anticipating here? Yeah, it's possible. And I've been very 50-50 about this for obvious reasons because this schematic doesn't always play out in the favor of bulls and this schematic does not always play out in the favor of bears. So it's a sideways pennant schematic. We're looking at things through a particular lens, trying to determine whether or not it's going to go up or down. And all we really have is some pretty high volume on the whole, but it's relatively flat. You know, it's hard to read this range. It just is. And the only thing that we can say right now that's a little bit more definitive is that on this particular move into this final iteration, it pushed to the upside. That's it. That would be a definitive explanation. It's just what's happened. Well, that's happened. Has that happened before? No. So we need to be willing to say right now, unless something changes, I don't think this is particularly bearish. Now you might say that, hey man, they're just waiting, sellers just waiting, and once it gets up to the top, the next top, it's going to sell off, and the next top is going to sell. Okay, maybe, but you really can't tell something's a UT or a UTAD unless you see that slide back down through. once that slide happens, I know you might think that's too late, but it's not too late. If the slide happens and if it did happen, you would easily be able to tell by the time it got down to $8. You know, it would break down through here, and you'd still have plenty of entry point to go from like 8 all the way down through whatever 7. I mean, it's not like you're missing out the boat by guessing here. I just think that's silly. So this push up, to me, wasn't my favorite. It looked a little more like a UT. Same thing could have been said about this guy at first as well, since both of these do the same thing effectively. Once it finds support, it goes up higher and then comes down and makes a new low. But they also both push resistance, so it's a mixed bag. It's like there's two sides to that coin. It's not just that they're coming and making a new low. They're also making a new high, and then making a new low, and then they're essentially like buying in, dropping the price, and then doing it again. So, you know, is this a fake out? Everybody's going to want to be right. You know, everyone's going to want to say it if they, oh, I saw it, it was a fake out. I don't know, because I'm not going to try to predict it right now. I've been doing that, and frankly, it just every single day it flip-flops. I see buyers here, I see sellers here. I see times where sellers have come in pretty strong. I see times where buyers have come in and have pushed this stock up with very little effort. And it seemed like it could very easily just rip back to the upside. And quite frankly, there's just not really been a lot of strength on the seller's side. Every time the sellers have had an opportunity to drive the price, they just get rejected. And buyers just push it back up. And this is why we've been making pretty consistently, making some higher lows here. Now, is it possible, again, that this is some kind of a massive like UT formula and it's going to end up coming above and then distributing? Yeah. I think that a lot of the folks who are looking at this thing are thinking that it's going to have this low price target. They're not looking for it to go really, really high. A lot of your institutional players, the ones that are making these claims about where they think the price is going to go, a lot of them have been dropping their prices. That's a sentiment kind of thing, you know? They're not expecting it to go up very high. They think, yeah, maybe it comes up to 15 and fills this gap, and then it's going to run out of steam. So is that possible? Sure. It's possible. Is it possible this just continues to upthrust and it does go up to 930 and then comes down? Yeah. That's also possible. You know? It's equally as likely in my mind that it happens like immediately. I think it would even make more sense to happen immediately. But sure, if they pump the price up here and it looks bad at 930, then you get out. You don't need to hold it forever, you know? I don't feel like it's that complicated. Everybody wants to make $1 million in every play, but just take the good percentage moves and then leave it alone. I'm going to be looking at things like your 4-hour and your 1-day, you know, charts when we get up to this area. If we get up to this area, that's where I'll be looking. In the meantime, just kind of playing it by ear and just looking at what we see. And it is frustrating because things change daily, but that's the nature of a wedge. And it's not just, oh, it's going up or, oh, it's going down. I would have been much happier if we had dropped here and went for that spring instead of coming back up, but that's not what happened. And then you see like this could be a very distributive model, but it didn't break down. So instead it pushed back up above the creek. So I'm going to be waiting. I'm not going to rush to some assumptions here. I'm going to be waiting and seeing if there's a maybe an after hours drop today, or see where the sellers are come tomorrow. You know, if the sellers start dumping this thing immediately tomorrow and it's heavy selling volume, yeah, it's possibly a UT. It was just a trap. but I'm sorry, but not sorry, right? It closed at 834. It closed above 830, and to me, that's a big deal. Like, I think this is an SOS right here thus far. We could debate it, I suppose. But it moved up above the top at 839, came back down, basically just did like a 50-50 swing around it. There's not really much else to say, you know? It's almost perfectly like a 50-50 swing around 139. So what an SOS does is it typically pushes the resistance, and then you usually see some chop along the resistance line. It's an opportunity for sellers to try to stop the advance of the stock, but it's usually like where the buyers finally buy if it's going to continue. The only time this doesn't work out is if it's a UT or UTAD, and that's just where the sellers do stop the advance of the stock and the buyers don't commit. So are we there yet? No. Only thing that seems to have happened right now is that we made a little distribution right here. There's a little bit of a paw with cat ears, and that's it. Volume in this spot, higher volume. Well, remember, UTAD would have high volume in the tops. Now, this one does have a higher volume push, but if you look at the hole here, the top does not have the highest volume. This particular area right here does. The buy-in does. The top here does not. Volume is quite a bit lower. And we'll see, again, it's a little bit minutia right now because there's not much to look at. All we had was the push and the pullback. Aside from this big candle right here, and part of this is buying, you can tell because of that wick. Aside from that big candle, there's not really much to say about volume. It's just higher volume overall, but it's a push over. Once it got up to the top, volume was already kind of dying off, and then it went back to almost average volume. So maybe a little above average, but no, I don't think it's a high volume top. Look at the difference between these two things. What I'm trying to say, like, notice how sellers dumped on it right here on this, what we would call like a UT, right? And I maybe can't see very well as this chart's messed up, but I don't know if I can do a better job of scaling it. Yeah, but notice how like here you have like an escalation of volume and there's a pretty succinct dumping that occurs. And volume remained really high for the most part throughout that whole top. It's got that kind of rounded look. I'm not really seeing that right now. I know it's kind of similar. This is a weird thing to debate because I think a lot of it's in the eye of the beholder. As you might argue, that's still high, but to me, that doesn't look the same. To me, it looks like this volume peaks at the top. See that? And then this one, it doesn't peak at the top. So in this case, volume ramps all the way into the top and then starts sliding back down. And in this case, highest volumes in these two push-ups right here. It's like the highest volumes right in the beginning. And then there's a small spike in selling, maybe in selling volume, but it's mostly just down. Now, this particular little pop right here could be something, but I don't know. It's the last 2 minutes of the day or whatever. I don't know. To me, it just looks like breakout volume. Like it broke out and then it needs to have smart money buy-in. But I don't see it as the volume. It's clearly not. objectively, the volume is not in the top. It's mostly in the breakout. The 1 minute chart looks worse. Is that what you're saying? No, I don't think so. It's the same to me. The only volume pop that I see in that top is this very first big wick. It still to me just looks like this is just diminishing volume. I'm not sure I follow you. It doesn't to me look like all the volume's in the top. It's a little heavier right there. That's for sure. There's going to be selling on the top though. Yeah, in my opinion, that's pretty remarkably different than this one, which is very heavy volume into the peak and then back down. It looks the same. Like there is a mild bump here, so I don't want to make it seem like there's no volume in the top at all. But it's not the same. All right. Well, you might be right. We may dump in the morning. May not. We'll see. I mean, look, the thing is if sellers want to drop it, they can drop it. Go for it, you know? And the thing is, I don't really care. But that's what I was trying to say before. Is like, I don't really care if it comes back down again. I just wanted to close today higher because that sends a signal out that bears weren't able to sell this back down. Like they thought that, you would think that they'd be able to. This to me looks like a pretty succinct M cross. And if we need to come back down, we can come as low as like 805 or something, like this could still come way down here and be fine. So the idea of like it has to be a UT doesn't really add up to me yet. I could just as easily see this coming over, crossing this one again. Just speculation, but you could just as easily see this. And then do it all over again. Anyways, look, I'm not saying it can't be an upthrust, but I just don't think it's the same. This is a much wider top than this previous one. Most of these that have sold off sell off within minutes. When they're doing these upthrusts, they just heavy sell right back down. Very, very steep angle. This is very rounded. I guess we'll find out. Tomorrow is going to be a big day because we're going to see if there's continuation. Today was just the breakout, possibly an SOS setup. Volume's not awesome yet, but I don't think it will be until we see something like this. So we get another M shape that breaks out tomorrow. It'll probably head way back up to 890. A lot of people are going to be looking at max pain this week, so you can keep that in mind, back of your head. That's down to 8. It is possible that this thing could just chop and not follow through anymore, or we could be just really early about this particular S curve. I think the way that I drew the S curve looks correct to me. I mean, it looks pretty slick, like pretty good. So I'm not going to doubt myself just because. At least for now, it looks pretty darn good. So This bigger one, I mean. So I think it's going to be a bit of a 50-50 swing around it. Like we're probably going to get a pullback that comes across the S curve, and we'll drop down maybe to like 816 or something. And I think we're going to see that cross then locally. So we'll see it jump. So for what it's worth, this is what I'm thinking. I'm listening to you. You're not wrong, Reese. There's been times where we've had sort of that hanging UT, but that's usually more of this guy, the cat ears. So the first one's usually like the up thrust is usually pretty violent. And then the second one, this is just typical of most distribution, might just hang there before it drops. So that does happen quite a bit. That's why I'm saying it depends on what happens right here. It all comes back to the same things. On the cat ears, you can't have it just chop and like sit there and then kind of keep bleeding down through those fib fans. It needs to make progress upward. I was talking about that earlier in the stream. This guy. There's a big difference between the second part of this setup. The first part looks basically the same, right? The second part has a really distinct difference, which is that you start moving out. And sometimes it's a bit difficult to kind of determine what's going on in the second part because it might move really slow, you know, during this motion. But this is typically what we see with the S-curve, and that's all it is. So yeah, it's possible this is a lot slower or flatter, you know, but it won't break down like this without some kind of a reversal if it's going to go up. Usually that's more of an indication of downside, which is what I was looking at here. And I think our fake out already happened. I think this was the fake out to the downside. So this could have been like a massive distribution right here. All I had to do is hook today, and it would have gone down into the toilet. Instead, it reversed. So I feel like the fake out, just in my opinion, it's kind of like they've already faked it out, down, up, down, and now up again. It's a bit much, a bit excessive. So this one, what it did is it just ripped back above. And that doesn't usually happen unless it's moving. Unless it's moving out, you know. Anyways, neither here nor there. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens on this schematic going into tomorrow. For now, we're going to have to just kind of leave it at that. And I think we're in good shape. It doesn't look bad to me. I do agree with Reese. If you do see that UT, it's going to have to break all the way back down through here. So, you know, by the time it gets down to 8, you would know. I think if it holds here tomorrow along this trend, we're going to be in good shape. I'm not really concerned about it. I think you'll see that continuation in the S-curves building up and like moving on out. It's very likely. There's not much else to say. Yeah, I mean, we broke out on that 2 hour or above. We made a higher high here, so it looks good. Yeah, did we not fill a gap? Not sure which you're referring to. I thought we filled all the gaps this morning. 785. I'm not seeing a gap at 785. Mine's looks complete, so. Later, apes. Yeah. All right. Yeah, we'll talk to y'all later. You have a good one.